Try to remember last night. You got into bed, closed your eyes, and somewhere between that moment and your alarm going off, 8 hours just vanished without a trace. And I don't mean it fades slowly, like an old photo losing its color over the years. It's gone completely, like a movie that gets cut off right in the middle of the most important scene. You don't remember your last thought. You don't remember the moment your eyes closed and didn't open again. You can't even pinpoint that thin line between being awake and being asleep, which is a little absurd when you think about it, because this is something you've done every single night, tens of thousands of times in your life. You'd think doing something that many times, you'd remember what it actually feels like, at least once. But nobody does. And when you actually dig into why, the answer doesn't make this mystery smaller. It makes everything weirder. Let's start with the brain chemistry, because it's more dramatic than most people realize. Every hour you're awake, your brain burns through energy nonstop. And one of the byproducts of that process is a chemical called adenosine. It starts quietly building up the second you open your eyes in the morning, like a tab that keeps running that you're not allowed to pay off until bedtime. The longer you're awake, the higher that number climbs. And adenosine doesn't just sit there. It actively suppresses the systems that keep your brain alert, which is why hour 12 of your day always feels so much heavier than hour 3. And coffee, by the way, doesn't actually give you energy. It just blocks your brain's ability to read that exhausting tab. Kind of unsettling when you think about it, especially around your 4th cup of the day when you're still trying to look like you've got it together. At the same time, your circadian clock, that 24-hour rhythm run by a cluster of cells in your hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, starts dialing down your alertness signals as it gets dark. Your pineal gland releases melatonin, your body temperature drops slightly. And once enough of these signals line up at once, an actual switch flips. A small cluster of neurons in the ventrolateral preoptic area of your hypothalamus starts actively shutting down the neurotransmitters that keep you sharp, including norepinephrine, serotonin, and histamine. In other words, your brain isn't so much drifting off to sleep as it's talking itself back from the edge of alertness. And right in the middle of that internal negotiation, something happens to your thalamus. And this is where the story stops being about sleepiness and starts being about memory. Normally, your thalamus works like a relay station. Everything you see, hear, and feel passes through it before reaching your cortex, which is where you actually experience and store things. As you start to fall asleep, a structure called the thalamic reticular nucleus starts gradually blocking that flow. The outside world, the phone buzzing on your nightstand, the cars going by outside, none of it gets passed along anymore. Your cortex goes quiet. Not because nothing's happening, but because it's not being told anything is happening. Picture it like this. You're filming yourself falling asleep on your own phone. At some point, your hand relaxes, the phone tilts down, and the footage doesn't end cleanly. It breaks into static right when you'd need the clearest shot. That's exactly what's happening inside your head. The camera is failing in real time, starting a few minutes before you're actually out. So the honest answer to why can't I remember falling asleep is this. The act of falling asleep is your brain actively dismantling its own ability to record that exact event. There's one more piece, and it matters just as much as the thalamus closing that gate. Right before that gate shuts, your hippocampus, the structure responsible for turning fresh experiences into long-term memories, quietly switches jobs too. Instead of recording anything new, it starts sorting back through what happened to you that day, like a night shift editor deciding what makes the final cut and what gets left on the floor. And here's the part that stings a little. That hazy, drifting, increasingly foggy feeling right before you fall asleep doesn't actually contain any useful information. Nothing dangerous, no decisions to make, nothing worth holding on to. And it seems like across all of humanity, every single night, brains have quietly agreed on one thing. The last few minutes before sleep just aren't worth archiving. If the story stopped there, it'd already be a satisfying answer. But it gets stranger, because your brain doesn't just quietly power down. There's a stage almost nobody realizes they go through every single night, called hypnagogia. It's the transition zone between being awake and that first stage of light sleep, And during that window, which might last a few seconds or a few minutes, your cortex is still partly active while your thalamus has only closed the gate halfway. In that gap, your brain starts generating its own images and sounds. Researchers have woken people up right in the middle of hypnagogia and recorded all kinds of strange things. Shapes drifting through their field of vision, a stranger's face flashing by, someone calling their name from nowhere, a few notes of music from who knows where. There's a good chance you had a private hallucination of your own last night and never knew it, simply because the machinery that was supposed to remember it had already shut off while it was happening. This is different from a normal dream. If you wake up during REM sleep later in the night, chances are you'll remember at least some of it. But hypnagogic images are way more fragile than that. Wake someone up and ask what they just saw, even 30 seconds later, and the memory is already starting to dissolve. Ask a minute after that, and it's gone completely, like the experience only existed for the exact instant it happened and not a second longer. Then there's the thing almost everyone's experienced, but nobody's fully explained. That sudden falling sensation paired with a full-body jerk that snaps you back awake. This happens to somewhere between 60 and 70% of people, and one of the most widely supported theories is honestly a little funny. When your muscles relax to prepare for sleep, an older part of your nervous system misreads that as an actual sign you're losing your balance. So it fires off an emergency signal telling your body to catch itself, possibly a leftover instinct from ancestors who used to sleep in trees, where suddenly relaxed muscles really were dangerous. Whether or not that theory is completely accurate, it's pretty clear that reflex never got the memo that you're sleeping on a mattress now, not a branch. So every once in a while, you jerk hard enough to startle the person lying next to you, and then you can't remember a single thing you were dreaming, hearing, or seeing right before it happened. It's honestly the same mechanism as nodding off during a meeting that's gone on way too long, or let's be honest, during someone's overly long wedding toast, and then suddenly jolting back awake while everyone wonders why you look so startled. Sleep scientists have actually mapped this whole process by waking people up at different points and asking what they just experienced. In the earliest stage, people usually describe disconnected fragments, a color, a shape, no story attached to any of it. A little deeper, the images start having more texture, maybe a sense of being somewhere, even the beginning of a storyline, and then it all dissolves within seconds of being asked about it. And here's the part that makes everything messier. Sleep doesn't hit your whole brain at the same time. It arrives region by region. Your motor cortex might already be fading while your auditory area is still quietly registering sound. That's why if you've ever dozed off in a meeting or on a long car ride, you sometimes have this vague sense that something just happened right before you jolted back awake. Different parts of your brain cross the finish line at different times, and the part responsible for narrating the whole experience isn't the part that sticks around the longest. There's one more strange detail documented in sleep science, called sleep state misperception. Some people wake up completely convinced they were awake for nearly the entire night, that they heard every hour tick by, while the equipment in the sleep lab shows they were actually sleeping soundly the whole time. Your subjective sense of being awake or asleep and the objective, measurable state of your brain sometimes don't line up at all. Which means the question of exactly when you fell asleep might not have a clean answer, not just philosophically, but neurologically. And that brings up something worth sitting with for a second. Every night, there's a gap in your experience that you never notice, simply because the part of you that would notice that gap is the exact part that switches off to create it. You are, quite literally, absent for about a third of your life, and you have zero sense of that absence, because sensing the absence of consciousness would require you to already be conscious. Ancient Greeks seem to have sensed this, in some vague way, a long time ago. Aristotle once described sleep as a state suspended somewhere between being alive and not being alive, and the Greeks made Hypnos, the god of sleep, the twin brother of Thanatos, the god of death. Not because they thought sleep was dangerous, but because there's something genuinely unsettling about the idea that your sense of self just stops every night, and then some version of you, claiming to be you, picks the story back up the next morning, with no memory at all of the gap in between. So here's the full picture. Adenosine and melatonin tip the scale towards sleep. Your hypothalamus flips the switch on alertness. Your thalamus closes the gate, cutting off the sensory raw material your cortex would need to build a memory. Your hippocampus, meanwhile, has already made its own call. Nothing in that window was worth keeping. Somewhere in the middle of all this shutting down, you pass through a private hallucination you'll never remember, possibly along with a jolt triggered by an instinct built for a tree branch, not a memory foam mattress. Different regions of your brain slip into sleep slightly out of sync with each other, so the exact moment you'd need to remember, in order to remember falling asleep, never actually existed as a single point in time. And by the time every system involved has gone completely quiet, there's no version of you left awake enough to record any of it. Over the course of your life, you'll fall asleep somewhere around 30,000 times, and you won't remember a single one of them. No goodbye, no final thought held on to, no one standing there as a witness to the handoff. Just the version of you who lay down and the version of you who woke up, connected by a bridge that neither one of them ever got to see.